In this video, we'll be going over IRS Form 843, Claim for Refund and Request for Abatement. Now, this tax form is used by a variety of different taxpayers for many reasons, and all of the reasons can be contained in the form instructions. For most taxpayers, the most popular or the most common reason that you would be using this form is if you were assessed a tax penalty for failure to file, failure to pay taxes in a timely manner. Perhaps you were subject to some sort of an installment agreement because you had tax debt and you needed to set up a payment plan to pay that down. Part of a couple of programs the IRS has is a way to be able to request penalty abatement either under a first-time program or for reasonable cause. And it turns out that the IRS website actually contains specific guidelines on what would constitute reasonable justification for a first-time penalty abatement. So you can, if you have a IRS letter that you've received, you can follow the instructions on that. You can call to request penalty abatement, or you can complete this form. And if you complete this form and you cite reasonable cause right here under line 5A as one of the reasons, the IRS will take a look at this claim to see if you meet the criteria for a first-time penalty abatement and then apply that program instead if applicable. So there are a variety of other reasons you would use Form 843 to request tax refunds, abatements. A lot of them have to do with employer payroll considerations. There's a complete list in the form instructions. We'll proceed through this example as if we were requesting a penalty abatement on behalf of a individual taxpayer due to a reasonable cause. However, the form instructions specifically state that there are certain circumstances where you should not use Form 843. Again, a complete list is in the form instructions if you need to go into detail, but generally speaking, if you're requesting a refund or abatement for something where you need to use a different tax form, then you should use the different tax form instead of Form 843. For example, if you're filing an amended tax return and you need to change amounts to your tax liability, then you would file Form 1040X, the amended individual tax return, to change the amounts that you previously reported or to make certain elections after the prescribed deadline. But you would not use 843 to make those changes. Several other examples include IRS Form 8379, which is the injured spouse allocation. If you needed to claim your portion of a joint refund that was used to offset your spouse's past due obligations. You can read more about that on our website. We have a step-by-step guide for IRS Form 8379. We also have a separate video on this YouTube channel if you want to know more about that. So, and again, the form instructions contain a complete list of other situations in which you would not use Form 843. Now, as a general rule, you need to file a separate Form 843 for each tax period or year or a different type of tax. So in general, you must claim a credit or a refund within 3 years of the date that you filed your original return or 2 years from the date that you paid the tax, whichever one is later. And if you do not file a claim within that period, you may not be entitled to that credit or refund. So there's more information for specific circumstances. You can research that in IRS Publication 556, which outlines examination of returns, appeal rights, and refund claims. So any taxpayer can file IRS Form 843, or if you've authorized someone to represent you in front of the IRS on IRS Form 2848, your declared representative may do so if it's authorized in writing on that Form 2848. And finally, if you are filing as a legal representative on behalf of a decedent, then you would attach your completed Form 843. You would attach a statement that you filed the return and that you're still acting as the decedent's representative. If you did not file the original return, then you would need to attach supporting documentation, whether it's letters of administration, appointment letters, to show that you have authority, and you would file IRS Form 1310, which is a statement of person claiming a refund on behalf of a decedent, with your Form 843 if you're the legal representative. And if you need more information, our website and videos have step-by-step instructions on both IRS Form 2848, which is the power of attorney declaration, or Form 1310, which is the statement of a person claiming a refund due a deceased taxpayer. So because you don't necessarily file this form with your tax return, there are specific instructions on where to file based on your circumstances. So if you're filing this in response to a notice that you received in the mail from the IRS, then you would mail it to the address shown in the notice. There's specific instructions. If you're requesting a claim on behalf of an estate, then there's an address in the form instructions for the office within the IRS that handles those claims. So we will walk through this step by step, again, as if we were claiming a refund and a request for abatement due to reasonable cause. So on with the form. As you can see, this is a one-page tax form, right? And there are a variety of scenarios. So we're going to go ahead and jump into this. We're going to use our hero, John Smith, and his social security number. And then we're going to use his address. For the purpose of this, we're going to state that John Smith is not married. And since this was his individual income tax return, we don't need to include an employer identification number. So if you were married filing a joint tax return, then you would need to enter your spouse's social security number. If you don't have a social security number, but you have an individual taxpayer identification number, which may depend on your residency status as within the United States, then you may enter that instead. So now, if you recently moved or if you changed your name on your original tax return, then you would need to enter your name and address as shown on the tax return itself, and then entering your daytime phone number. All right, so we would prepare a separate Form 843 for each tax period or fee year. So let's imagine that we are looking to request an abatement for income tax penalty that occurred in the 2021 tax year. You would enter the complete tax year, And then let's imagine that, we'll put in $2,000 as the penalty that we would like to have abated. And this was an income tax penalty. If the claim or request involves a penalty, then you would enter the Internal Revenue Code section for which the penalty is based. And so when you go into the IRS form instructions, it defers to whatever the code section was on the notice of assessment that came with your letter. So we're going to enter the code section for failure to file penalty. And I'm going to find that momentarily. So the Internal Revenue Code section for that would be 6621. Sorry, did I say 6621? I meant 6651. 6651, failure to file tax return or pay tax. So then we would say penalties, interest, and additions to tax. We would say you can also use this form to request an abatement of interest that was assessed as a result of IRS errors or delays. So you can use that. You can use that for penalty or addition to tax as the result of erroneous written advice. We're going to list reasonable cause or some other reason allowed under the law. So, and then this is the catch-all, so that if the IRS determines that abatement would qualify under first time, then they would grant it under the first time as opposed to under reasonable cause. And then you can state the date of the payment. Let's just say that we originally paid this in June of 2022, and this was on our Form 1040. So then you type in the explanation field your reasonable cause statement. So let me go back to line 5. There are some explanations that might be required specifically for IRS error or delay. There are two very specific definitions that are important to take note. The IRS abates interest if there was an unreasonable error or delay in performing a managerial or ministerial act. So the managerial act means that an administrative act occurs during the processing of your case where there was a temporary or permanent loss of records or the exercise of judgment or discretion relating to the management of personnel. So conversely, a ministerial act means a procedural or mechanical act that does not involve the exercise or judgment that occurs during the processing of your case after all prerequisites have taken place. So, you may need to discuss your specific tax situation with your tax advisor to see whether or not your case falls under one of those two reasons that the IRS would abate interest on the tax. So now the IRS can also abate or refund any portion of a penalty or addition to tax caused by erroneous advice furnished to you in writing by the IRS. However, there are some restrictions. If you reasonably relied on the advice, if the written advice was in response to a specific written request for advice made by you or your representative, or if the penalty or addition did not result from your failure to provide the IRS with adequate and accurate information. So those are, a little bit of the background information for these first two areas on Block 5A. Under line 6, again, you'll annotate the specific tax return that you're looking to abate. So if you also needed to go back to like your S corporation 1120S, you would have to file a completely different 843 specifically for that. That's just an example. That's not even on here, but like a quarterly employer tax statement versus your Form 1120. And then finally, under line 7, you can explain in detail, show your computation for the credit, the refund, or the abatement. You can attach additional documentation. If you do that, be sure to include your name and social security number or your identifying number, whether it's an ITIN or an EIN, so that it can be attached to this, but it's tied to your Form 843. So again, if you need more space, you would attach additional sheets. Right, so, again, depending on your situation, you may need the help of your CPA or your tax practitioner to really come up with a reasonable cause explanation for this. If you're filing on behalf of a company, then you would sign as an officer, and otherwise you can sign as yourself. If you are requesting an abatement on a joint tax return, then you would need your spouse to sign as well. And finally, below is for the paid preparer. So if you're having this performed on your behalf, then your paid preparer would complete this information with their name, signature, date. The PTIN is the tax practitioner's identifying number, and then the firm's name, address, the firm's EIN. And then with this form, you would most likely, your tax professional would attach a copy of Form 2848 to this. And again, they would help you get it to the correct address. So, but specifically, just real quick, do not use this form if your request involves overpayments on income tax withholding, refund on excise taxes based on certain fuels, or an overpayment of excise taxes as reported on the form stated at the top of 843. And so that's all we have for this video. We've written an at-length article, which you can find on our website. Simply go to teachmepersonalfinance.com, type in IRS Form 843 in the search bar, and you should see our article. If you like our articles, please check out or subscribe to our newsletter. And if you like our YouTube videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please post them in the comment section or send me an email. Thank you very much and have a great day.